here on this farm, there's 10 paddocks. There's 10 separate fields now. It always wasn't that way. Rotational grazing wasn't really a thing until the 70s or 80s. People started doing it more intensively, as they call it, breaking one big farm into smaller fields and then rotating through that system. You know, you start at one end and you just make a circle all the way around and you come back. It helps the land, it helps the soil, the forage. It also helps the animals. You could also say it helps the producer, the farmer. The biggest thing is it allows grass to rest, and when it has that rest time, it allows the regrowth to be a lot better than it would be if the animals just had free range to run the whole entire farm and eat whatever they wanted to eat at whatever time. Another big thing that it'll do, it will extend the producer's grazing time throughout the year, which means that will help lower your cost with hay and feeding. It'll extend the grazing period, if you will, so you can graze further into the fall and into the winter, and you can start grazing earlier in the spring if you save a little bit. And the other thing is, when you get into grazing these fields, you're concentrating animals on a smaller footprint of land than they would be if they were on the entire area. So when doing that, you've got to be careful of the grass height that you're grazing the grass. If you leave them in there too long, then they'll wipe it out and it could be worse for the land. You got to pay attention to the height of the grass when you move the animals out of that field. You know, 3-4 inches around here is what we try to do, depending on the time of the year. If we talk about the animals and the animal health, it helps them as well. It gives them fresh grass. You know, the clover will come back, all the grass will come back stronger every time they move into a field. That field could potentially have rest of, you know, a month before it gets back into it. The more fields you have, the longer rest period you can have between it. So if we talk about how it helps the animals, in the summertime when the flies get bad, if you're moving them around, it's not as bad as it would be if they're just sitting there in one spot all the time. The mud holes, when it rains, you know, the muddy messes can cause foot rot, it can cause problems. The other thing is when we're calving, if you have a fresh, clean field to put the new babies and their moms onto, it will keep the mom's teats clean so that the baby's not trying to nurse on a mud sickle, if you will. Keeps the ground clean. So there's a lot of benefits with rotational grazing, but it takes a little bit to get into the rotational game, if you will. You've got to have the fence and you've got to have water sources. Alright, so we're looking in what we call the pump house. It's a cinder block building. It's got a roof over it. It's insulated. We've got a panel box. That's where the power comes in. Down here in the middle, you can see the well, and this well feeds not only the house on the farm, but the frost-free troughs that are out in the pastures. Another thing about water systems up here in the wintertime is keeping them from freezing. As I mentioned, we have an insulated block building with a roof, but there's also down here, you can see baseboard heat, and that's connected into a thermostat to keep the pump and the well and everything in here from freezing, because if that freezes, then the animals in the house don't get water. This pressurized water system, if you need to work on it and you just go and cut a line with it all on, it will start spewing pressurized water out of that, and it'll keep draining and going. So when these systems are installed, it's a good idea to put in cutoff valves. So if, let's say, a trough freezes or a pipe freezes, or it gets dug up or busted with the fence post and you need to fix it, all you have to do is go hit that shut-off valve and you can go dig it up, work on it, put it back together, and then just cut the valve back on, as opposed to turning the whole system off. The other big thing that we have in here is this is the electric fence box. That fence box powers all of the electric fencing on the farm. So without that working, those fences are essentially useless. The animals will walk right through them. The shock is enough to keep them off, but if that's not working, then the fences are pretty much pointless. This electric wire right here feeds the division fences that we have around here, which are 2-strand high tensile electric. You can see this fence here is a woven wire fence with a strand of barbed wire on top. That doesn't need any electric on it, but this is good for a perimeter fence. When the power goes out, you know, you're still going to have your perimeter boundary so the animals can't go to a different property. These are temporary fences that are used with the electric fence. You stick them in the ground and they hold up the temporary electric fencing wire, and this is on a spool, just kind of like a fishing reel. It's got a latch over here. You can see where these orange handles are. If this is hooked to a fence that's hot and has juice on it, as I say, you can hold it by the orange handles. They're plastic, and you won't get the shock. You can see it's got the reel and the teeth on it to where if you bring it back, it'll lock and hold it. And it's got this hook right here, so you can hang it on the fence. And you can walk with it, spool it out, or ride on the 4-wheeler and make your fence. And then when you're done with it and you want to reel it up, you can do that. They make different types of gate handles you can hook to the end of this. They make one with a metal end on it that hooks right to this, so you can hook it to a hot fence. Or if you want to hook it to a fence that's not hot and you don't want it to ground out the whole system, they make essentially a handle that's just plastic so that the wire won't ground out onto the fence. It's no use without this electric box. The electric box plugs into an outlet, and then it also has ground rods. There's 2 or 3 ground rods that are connected to the box, and they are measured in kilovolts. So the voltage on the fence, the higher the voltage, the more shock it's going to give whatever touches it. This is an electric one you plug in. They also make solar boxes for places that electric service isn't readily available. We have 3 different water sources here on this farm. We have frost-free troughs that are powered and fed by the well and the pressurized pump system. We have a spring-fed concrete trough that you develop a spring that's coming out of the ground. You collect that water, you put it into a pipe, and you use gravity that feeds it downhill to a concrete trough. It fills that trough up, and then it has an overflow pipe. The water goes, once it gets to the height of the overflow pipe, the water drains down through that and back to the creek and goes back to the streams and the creeks. And then we also have another concrete trough that is fed from a pond in the same manner as the spring. Some producers will do what they call limited accesses into a creek or a stream or a pond, and that's giving the animals a small area that goes into the water source so they can get in there and drink and get back out. And then some people, you know, let them openly go into ponds and creeks and everything else, and that has its downfalls for the animal and the ecosystem. But those are the 2 main things that's hard to come by when you're getting going on the rotational grazing. So one other factor that needs to be considered in a grazing system, and rotational grazing in particular, is shade. We need water, we need fence, and the animals also need shade. It's middle of October now and the sun's out. It's mid-morning. It's not really hot, but as you can see behind us, all the animals are in the shade. In the summertime, May, June, July, August, when it's really, really hot, it is essential. I mean, the animals would not survive if they didn't have shade. They would overheat. And every farm is different on how you can acquire that shade. This is a new fence line, relatively. And behind us, 10 yards or so, is a bunch of old cedar trees that used to be an old fence row. So it's easy sometimes in some spots to, if you're taking out an old fence line, to reuse those trees as now shade. So you just move the fence line off of it however so far, and that will be shade in the field. Sometimes the pastures that are pastures now used to be crop fields, so there wouldn't be a whole lot of trees in them. Some producers have tents, some type of tent shade structure that they can actually cart around in the summertime if there's a field that has absolutely no shade. The animals have to have shade in every field that they're in. The wintertime, it also, the trees can also give them shelter all year long, but especially in ice and snowstorms, finding shelter for these animals, whether it be from the heat or from the weather, and the trees and the shade do that.